Nobody in San Antonio has met my son yet. So
Facts.
we're all bringing him. Yeah, we're bringing him. So me and my wife and Miles are all coming, and we'll be there for about 2 weeks actually.
All right. Well, what's up, man? It's your boy B Dog. You know what I'm saying? It's been a while. Uh, and had a lot going on over these past couple months. So I haven't been able to put out the product as much as I probably should, probably could. But we changing that. We making big steps. We progressing. Um, originally I was gonna do this topic with my friends. I'm not gonna lie, because I'm like, okay, this would be a good topic, for the peer group. Like everybody, this is what everybody wants to talk about, right? But then I'm like, I have someone in my family who's actually licensed to talk about this kind of stuff, right? And not only that, but more importantly, he's been where I've been before, right? He's been this age, So um, I'm like, you know what? Let me hit up Jason, man. Let me talk to him. So this is my very, very first guest, my very first video pod. So I'm gonna go ahead and let him introduce himself, man. And y'all will see why this is the man I needed on the pod.
Well, I didn't know I was your first guest, so I'm
Yes.
honored to be the first guest on Culture. Yeah, this is exciting. This is historic, right? Yeah, so I am Jason. I am Brandon's cousin. I'm also a licensed psychologist. Um, and so these days in my clinical practice, I mostly do couples therapy. So I spend a lot of time thinking about relationships, talking about relationships, helping rebuild relationships for people who want to. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, I like another reason. Like I felt like it was important, especially like the people in our culture. I feel like because there's this stigma about therapy, and like in a lot of people's eyes, like it makes you weak or it makes you soft, or whatever the case may be. And like a lot of people, I feel like is just scared to just put themselves out there and just go and get therapy and go and seek the help that they need. So I feel like this is also like a good opportunity for like if anyone is going through these issues that we might talk about and could relate to it. You know what I mean? Being able to hear the advice from someone who knows what they're talking about, especially in this field. You know what I mean? I feel like it'll be really good for the followers, for the people.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna get it started, man. I want to talk about. Okay, so the topic of the day is relationships. If y'all haven't got it already, right? Um, and I want to talk about. Initially, I want to talk about before the relationship, right? So the cheesing season. You know what I mean? Like you getting to know somebody, like whatever the case may be. You know how that go. You've been here. You know how that go, right? So I took down a couple points, man. A couple questions, man, that I wanted to talk about. So, in your opinion, right?
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between what's a close friend and what's a potential partner? Because I feel like a lot of us run into this issue, right?
Uh-huh.
Whether we admit it or not, is one thing or another. But I feel like a lot of us run into this issue, especially at our age. And for those who don't know, I'm 21. I'll be 22 next month. So a lot of my peers, like we go through this. So that's my first question to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it's really about, honestly, it's just about choice,
Mm,
right? And I would say it's about mutual choice, right? So it's you and this other person have mutually decided that you're interested in taking it beyond a friendship,
right,
right? No good romantic relationship can exist without friendship, right? So
right,
it makes a lot of sense, I think, for most of us that we find ourselves either in a romantic relationship or in a situationship, right?
yeah,
Because we're friends with somebody, we're spending time together, that emotional intimacy is building,
mm,
right? We see each other more and more. We're sharing our lives, our dreams, our values, right? We're finding that some of those things are starting to sync up, right? Okay, okay, right? And so I think when we get to that point, really it's around choice, right? There's at that point there's no difference,
yeah,
if you will, right? Between sort of there's a fork in the road. We could go to the right and just be friends, right? Who are close and who can share these things, right? So, or we can go the other direction,
Yeah.
right? And decide that we want to see if there's a romantic connection there, right? And so that's just about exploring, right, and communicating, right, with this other person around like what it is that you're looking for. What do you
Right.
want? Is this something that sounds good to you? Is it something that fits in your life right now?
Right.
Right? Because the older we get, the harder it is to make relationships work.
Yeah. So
Right?
I've been told, unfortunately. Um. So okay. So like, how important do you think it is to establish a friendship prior to crossing that line? Right. Because a lot of people, I feel like they get into relationships like based off of lust, or it's more lust than it is
Mhm.
friendship or anything like that. So like, how important do you feel like that is, like prior to getting into a relationship?
That's an interesting question. So prior to getting into a relationship, I think it's probably like six of one, half a dozen of the other,
Yeah,
right? So there are pros and cons, right? So you definitely can, and people do all the time, build a friendship while you are also dating somebody,
yeah,
right? So you meet somebody that you don't know, you're going on dates, right? Maybe it's once or twice a week to start hanging out, whatever it is that you're doing, right? Then it increases in frequency again, right? You're getting to know each other, you're building that
yeah,
friendship on top of that sort of romantic piece,
mm,
right? That's not uncommon or strange, right? That's pretty typical. You can also start with a friendship and then move into a romantic relationship. That works. I think many of us have done that
mm,
with, differing levels of success, let's say, right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't know that it's always because you weren't friends beforehand,
yeah,
right? I think usually a relationship is going to begin to fall apart or fall apart entirely because you didn't become friends at some point, right? Whether it was before you started the relationship or while you were creating a relationship in the
yeah,
early stage, you created that friendship. I think that is that doesn't really matter,
yeah,
right? As long as you're building that friendship as you go. If you already have it, then it's a little bit easier in some ways. Although the hard part, if you've already been friends, right, is then you're moving from that platonic, there are boundaries around what we do
yeah.
and
Right,
don't do
right,
together.
right.
There are boundaries around what we do and don't say to each other, right? Because we're just platonic friends, we're not romantic, right? And so, like, getting over sort of shifting those boundaries and barriers, like that can be a bit of a challenge in moving from, I think, a friendship into a romantic relationship.
Yeah, I would say like boundaries and like friendships, like it's so complex because like I was talking to one of my friends the other day and like we
Mhm.
were talking about how like friends, like okay, so like two people who are in a relationship or starting to build a relationship, whatever the case may be, like being able to establish friendships outside of their relationships and how healthy that is. But
Mhm.
we were talking about like how complex and like why that may be an issue for so many people. And I was telling them I feel like it's an issue because like whenever you meet somebody, like you don't really know who they are yet, right? So like initially it may start out as, oh, okay, yeah, this is my friend, this is my homie or homegirl, whatever, cool. Like you may not see them in that way initially, right? But
Mhm.
as you get to know this person, that may change, and I feel like that scares a lot of people. So
Sure.
it's like it's so complex. It's so complex.
It is very complex. It is, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, right? Like relationships are always about choice, right? We
Yeah,
choose to be in relationship every day, right? And so I think that when things can get complex, right? When you're already with somebody and you have these friends and things are maybe beginning to shift, right, with
yeah,
these
right.
friends. It's like, okay, well, it was platonic at first, we were just friends. And now, I don't know, like I'm feeling a little bit different. You know what I mean? I think that's really about exploring where that feeling is coming from,
Yeah,
right? So, like, is it a genuine, right? Like, listen, the more I spend time with this person, the more it feels like this is a person that I could and want to be with,
right.
right? And how is that different than, let's say, I really have fun spending time with this person. Fun is always great. We always love to have fun,
Yeah,
right? My relationship takes more work, right? Or there's more conflict in my relationship. There's more arguing, there's more back and forth, there's more all that kind
yeah,
of stuff. And so it's really not about this other person. It's about like my current relationship isn't working and I don't know how to fix it. And maybe what I'm looking for is an out. And then all of a
Mm.
sudden, like my friend over here be looking real good all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
yeah,
And so I think then it's thinking about like, well, do you need to work on fixing your relationship, right? Or getting out of that relationship, right? Before
so,
you really take the time to consider like, oh, is this really about this other person?
yeah,
Right? Is there some genuine romantic feeling with this other person, or are they my escape?
yeah, facts, facts. So, okay, so where do you establish the boundaries then? Like where like how does that take place? Like what does that look like whenever you're in a relationship, you're with somebody, right? Because that's something that I've struggled with. Like over the years, and I didn't really notice it at first. I ain't really. I'm thinking I'm being cool. That's just me. That's my personality. But as I got older and started dealing with different people, like I started to realize, like, no, there was a severe lack of boundaries there, and that might have been why it got me in some trouble.
Hmm.
So where do you establish that? Like, where do you like? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because like everybody is a little bit different, right? So if you were to ask a bunch of people, you would get these different opinions around whether people think that like your relationship should be your primary interpersonal relationship,
Right.
right? So like there's nothing we don't talk about in our relationship, like everything, right, fits in this relationship. I was reading, you know who Esther Perel is? Okay, so she's this French psychologist. She does a lot of couples work. She has a couple podcasts, that kind of thing. But in one of her books, she sort of talks about how like we as a society are moving into this place, particularly in like Western society, right? We're moving into this place where we have this assumption that our romantic relationship should be the container for like our entire identities,
Yeah.
right? So there should be no differentiation, right, between this is my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my whoever, right? This is my best friend, right, who is platonic, right? These are my acquaintances, right? Other friends who aren't best friends, but they're more than acquaintances, right? There shouldn't be a differentiation, right? There's nothing that you should talk about, right, outside of your romantic relationship. And so her argument is that that's ultimately like not realistic, and I happen to agree with that, right? So I think on the one hand, the boundaries really need to be about, I think that there can be things that you talk about with your friends that you don't talk about with your partner, right?
Wait, talk
I
about that. Talk about that. Talk about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, right. So I think that so some of those things might be like, my wife doesn't like horror movies. I love horror movies. So I have friends, male and female, right, who I talk about horror movies with and watch horror movies with and like kick it with like around horror movies, right? There's nothing that's inherently wrong with that, right? She's aware of what's happening, right? I say, oh, I'm going to go hang out with this woman, right, who we're both friends with, and we're going to watch a movie. It'll be
Yeah.
fun, right? And she says, okay, that's great. Have fun, right? I don't like scary movies. Do you? Right? That's fine, right? I think that there are other things though, right, where I think when you're talking about your relationship to other people, I think when you're the last question I remember is that you asked me, what are some of the things that you might that maybe are, like what does it look like when you're talking about stuff outside of your relationship, right, with your friends
Yeah.
and not
Right.
inside your relationship? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So another big thing that I want to talk about, because I'm finding that this issue, like a lot of my peers, a lot of my close friends, a lot of people that I've talked to, and even some of my family members, honestly, communication is like a really really big issue, right?
Yeah, always. Uh-huh.
So I want to talk to you about like different ways I feel like that maybe we can improve that or like because like okay, so whenever you're having an issue with a partner, right?
Hmm.
Um, how do you determine like how do I say that? Like what is an appropriate amount of time before you talk to that partner about the issue, right? Like I feel like some people um they're the type of like person who feels like it needs to be talked about right then and there. Like, nah, this needs to be talked about right now. Um, and they might be dealing with somebody who prefers to, kind of process things before they talk about it. So, like, what does that look like? And like the different challenges that you could face dealing with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really think that the answer is it depends on the person, right? So as you kind of said, right, some of us are, let's just talk about it right now, right? I think that I usually am that kind of person. And what I've had to recognize is that for me, that's really anxiety driven,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's more worrisome to me to take 20 minutes and not know how you feel about something,
Yeah.
right? Than to just get into it immediately, even
Mm-hmm.
if it's really not the right time to get into it, right? Because I'm mad and she's mad or whoever,
Yeah.
right, is upset, right? We don't make great choices when we're mad, right? It's probably worthwhile to take some time, right? And so I think it's sort of, for me, what I've had to learn to do is like give space when space is needed
Mm.
because the relationship at the end of the day is what's important,
Yeah.
right? I think the flip side of that coin, right, is people who are like, well, I don't want to talk about it right now. I don't want to talk about it right now is fine as long as I don't want to talk about it right now isn't code for I don't want to talk about this ever again.
Ever. Yeah.
Right? So it's like, no, it happened. We don't need to talk about it, whatever. Right? That's not really a great way of handling stuff either.
Mm.
So what I usually tell, so as you can probably imagine, we do this in couples therapy a lot. And so what I usually will talk to my couples about that I'm seeing for therapy is, take some time, take a break. We have this idea called flooding, right? Which is where you get just basically you just get emotionally overwhelmed,
Yeah.
right? With anger, with worry, with sadness, with whatever. And
Yeah.
you're not really able to communicate very effectively during that time,
Right.
right? So it's not a good time to try and have a meaningful or productive conversation,
Yeah.
right? And so what I encourage people to do is take about 15 to 20 minutes break, right? And then come back and try it again. And so that kind of helps you get out of that, like, nah, we got to talk about it right now, right? Kind of a place. But it also takes you out of like, we haven't spoken in 6 days, right? Because I'm like not ready to really talk about this with you yet, you know? And so I think the other thing is that you can always like approach and step back from a conversation, right? So if you approach a conversation, right, it's you taking some time, you feel like you're less heated, and as you're starting to talk about it, right, you notice that you're getting like more and more heated. You can always say like, let's take a break, let's
Yeah.
take a step back, right? Like let's pause on this conversation for a little bit, and then we'll try again. Right. So I think again, right, there's nothing that has to get talked about immediately, right? Unless there's some emergent decision that has to get made,
Yeah.
right? Like in a time frame. But like most relationship things, right? It's like you could talk about them today, you could talk about them next week if you absolutely needed to, right? So if you have to sort of try and, approach and withdraw and approach and withdraw until you can sort of get it right, there's usually nothing time sensitive, right, that makes that a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I heard this saying, when emotion is high, logic is low. And
Mm,
it makes so much sense.
it's
it
100% true.
Yeah, that because like one
Yeah.
thing I noticed about myself, I guess it took I didn't really notice it in like my friendships per se, but I guess it took for like my relationships, and I guess relationships normally do get that out of you, but it took my relationships to like make me realize that like I was really bad at communicating. Like whenever my feelings was hurt about something, or whenever I was angry or upset or feeling rejected or neglected, like whatever it may have been, any negative emotion that you could feel, like I did a very poor job of like communicating that to my partner, the person that I was dealing with. So I felt like there was a lot of times where like I would get distant. You know what I mean? And like I feel like a lot of people go through that.
Hmm.
And distant, like you said, like it's okay to like, okay, if we don't want to talk about it now, okay, cool. Like you go over there, I go over here. We here. But to not talk about it ever, that's a problem.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's a problem.
Yeah, it is a problem. And it's because then things don't get resolved,
Yeah.
right? And so when things don't get resolved, they just tend to stick around and cause trouble later, right? Because then that next fight is about whatever that next fight is about, plus this other stuff that didn't get resolved because we
Right.
never went back and talked about it, right? And I still feel some type of way about 2 weeks ago, and I haven't really
Yeah.
had a chance to say that, right? So now when we're fighting about this small thing, right, other stuff gets brought in. And that's why sometimes people have this experience of like, it feels like we're having this level 10 fight about this level 3 issue. And I don't
Yeah.
understand why that is. That's often the reason, right? Is that, well, there's all this other stuff, right, that we haven't really talked about that hasn't really gotten resolved,
Yeah.
right? Or the pattern in our relationship is that we're only going to have a chance to talk about the stuff that bothers us every so often,
Mhm.
right? And so then I got to take my chance to be like, okay, here are the 19 things that I don't like about
Yeah.
right? Because I'm not going to get to say this for another 6 months.
Yeah.
You know what I
Fact.
mean? And that can feel really overwhelming to your partner, right? Because then all of a sudden you got this notebook, right? And you're like, okay, so 6 months ago, right, you said, right, and I hated that, right? And then like yesterday, right? And so then it can feel really overwhelming to them, right? Because you
Yeah.
have this whole laundry list of things, right? Where you're like, nah, here's how it's all not working, right? Or here, I got to say everything that you did that I didn't like, right? I got to say it all right now, even though that's not what's bothering me in this moment, right? And so I think when you have these conversations more regularly, it keeps that kind of thing from happening because then you can talk about stuff in, as close to the moment as is possible, right? And then you don't have to bring up old stuff, right? Which makes things a lot harder.
Yeah, and that's when a lot of people get passive aggressive. You know what I mean? Like, and
Totally.
I'm guilty of it. I can't even sit up here and
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
lie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think a part of it too, right? To what you were saying before about like not being able to communicate very effectively, like that's often around like our emotions. And this is especially true for guys, right? Because I think that men, especially black men, right, are really socialized, right, taught by our families, by society, that only certain emotions are acceptable, right? And so that's why we're usually pretty comfortable with anger, right? And so what I usually think about is like anger is always a shield against some other emotion, right? It's very rare that you actually only feel angry about a situation. Now, that happens, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
right? That happens, but most often, anger is just the first emotion to get to the party,
Mm, that's
right?
definitely
Because we've been kind of taught that we got to keep all these other
yeah.
emotions behind the wall, you know? And so a part of it, one of the things that we do when I do with my couples therapy clients, right, is I use a little formula, right, which is I feel, and then you say all of the emotions that you're feeling. I feel mad, I feel worried, I feel scared, I feel
Yeah.
frustrated, I feel, dismissed or ignored, about, and then you say the situation. You don't interpret the situation, you just say the facts, right? About how I asked you to do the dishes and they're not done, right? And then what you say is I need, right? And that's where you put in like whatever your like behavioral or emotional need is. Right? Now it can be, like to do them dishes, right? But it could also be, right, like I need you to listen to me,
Yeah.
right? When I ask you to do something, right, I just need you to hear me when I say that
Yeah.
and then do it, right? Or I need you to follow through, right? Because I asked you to do it and you said, yeah, all right, that's fine, but it's not done now,
Facts. Yeah.
right? And so I need you to do it or listen.
So do you think communication is more important than comprehension? Because like it's one thing for you to tell me something, but if I'm not really like understanding what you're saying, like that's a whole nother issue. You know what I mean? So like what do you think
Yeah.
about
I mean, I think that you can't have one without the other,
that? Okay.
right? So if I'm not telling you words at all, you certainly aren't going to understand them,
Yeah.
right? So if I'm not communicating, you definitely can't comprehend, right? Then you're in a spot where you're guessing, right? And sometimes you'll guess right, but sometimes you'll guess wrong, and then I'm mad because you didn't
Right.
meet my needs. But I also never like told you what I needed.
Yeah.
So, right, like how much can I blame you, right, for not anticipating what it is that I was hoping for, right? But I think comprehension is important too, right? And so I think a part of that is, I think we do a lot of assumptions, right, in relationships. We assume that when the person that you're in a relationship with says, like, this is what I see, this is what I want, this is what I need, whatever, and you say, uh huh, we assume that we are on the same page, but we might not be.
Yeah, like I didn't talk, bro. I was just talking to one of my friends the other day, and when she see this, when she listen to this, she gonna know exactly who I'm talking to. And we was talking about like her situation, and somebody that she was dealing with, and he didn't know how she felt, and she just assumed that he's supposed to know how she feels. And I'm like, fam, why do y'all do that? Why do y'all just assume that we're supposed to know how y'all feel? I just don't. Now, don't get me wrong. Communication is not just verbal. So there are certain things that
Yeah.
you should be able to catch on to certain things. I get that. Okay, cool. I subscribe to that. I'm cool with that. Okay, cool. But to say that we should just know that I just don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where we forget that not everybody has lived our life,
Right.
right? And experienced the things that we have experienced, right? So there are things that make absolute perfect sense to me based on the luggage, right, that I carry around that's all filled with like my childhood experiences and just other experiences I've had as an adult and training I've had as a psychologist and like all that other kind of stuff, right? I carry that around with me everywhere that I go, right? But you don't, right? Like you haven't lived those same experiences. You haven't done the things that I've done, right? Or like lived the life that I've lived, right? And so it's easy to just assume, right? That it's like, well, how could anybody else think and feel differently in this situation,
Yeah.
right? It's like, well, they're a different person, you
Yeah.
know? And if I haven't told you, right, then how would you know? And
Right.
I think, you said something a second ago that I would push back on. You said like, well, we should be able to tell through some like nonverbals and stuff. Should we though? Right? Like, how would we know? Or is what we're doing in that situation applying experiences that we've had on our own or that we've had with other people we've been in relationships with or whatever? We're
Yeah.
trying to fit, right, those frameworks on top of the person across from us.
Mm.
And maybe they fit, right? If they fit, that's coincidence, right? We
Right.
don't know. We didn't
Yeah.
know that they would fit. We assumed that they would, and we happened to be right, right? But I think at the end of the day, it's for us to be able to communicate, right, what it is that we want and what it is that we need,
Right.
right? So, it's like if you feel a certain way, you should say that out loud to your partner, right? And a trick to figure out is we do summaries in couples therapy, right? And it feels kind of like when you first start doing it, it feels real cheesy,
Yeah.
because you like, I'll listen to what you say and then I have to repeat it back. It's like, okay, so Brandon feels like, this, and this, right? And he
Yeah.
thinks this, and like, and the way that he saw the situation was like this, and this,
Mm.
right? And then but that also proves that I was listening,
Right.
right? And
True.
then you
Yeah.
get to step in and say like, okay, well, I think you had it like 80% right. It's like you said this, but I would say it like this actually is how I think,
Yeah.
right? Or this is what I think and how I feel. Right. And so then I say, okay, all right, I get that.
Right.
Yeah, I get that. And then it's my turn, right? To kind of like, okay, well, like this is how I think and feel about this situation, right? This was my experience in this situation. And it's not about when we're doing that, it's not about convincing each other. So this is where people go wrong, right? Because you're trying to convince each other that my view of the situation and experience of the situation was right, which means that necessarily your view and experience of the situation was wrong.
Right.
That's your It's rare that you're going to convince someone of that,
Yeah.
right? What you can show them though, right, is like based on my experience of this situation, this is why I think and feel the way I think and feel on the other side of it, right? And then that gives people the opportunity to say like, okay, like I don't have to agree that that's what happened, but when you explain to me how you experienced this, I can have empathy, right, for why you feel played, right, or whatever. I can take accountability for being
Right.
like, I didn't mean to play you, right, but I can see how you feel like I did,
Right.
and so I'm sorry for that.
Okay. So do you think because like okay, so some couples feel like whatever you did before me, like your past, the people that you dealt with, I don't want to know anything about that. That ain't got nothing to do with me. Like all I care about is who you are now, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
then you have other couples who lean the other way and they feel like they need to know everything that they partner in doing, who they dealt with, like whatever. Do you feel like there's pros and cons to both sides, or do you feel like one side you probably shouldn't go that way, or like how do you feel about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's ultimately about trust, right? And so what we want is to be trusted by our partners and to feel as though we can trust our partners,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that if it genuinely, you and I were talking about this the other day, if it genuinely does not matter to you, right? Like what your partner did before they got with you,
Mhm.
then it's not worth asking about, right? Now, if it matters to you and you think it's wrong that it matters to you, and so you say like, "Nah, I don't care," but you actually do care,
Yeah.
right? Now that's not helpful,
Yeah.
right? You should say like, "Hey, this is what I need," right? This is what I'm looking for. This is what I want, right? That's what you want. Um, I think too, though, it's kind of like, well, why? Like, why? Right? Like, what does this information do for you?
Yeah.
You know, so like when I'm meeting with some of my, I see some individual clients too, right? And so when I'm meeting with like my college age clients, right, like the one of the top is that body count, right? Body count,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, like how is that useful to you,
Hmm.
right? It's like if you ask and you find out and then you feel some type of way,
Yeah.
well, I mean, you walked into that, didn't you? Right? You know, and so I think it's a part of it is just sort of like, well, why? Like, why is it that you need to know? Right? And do you need to know? Will knowing actually help you make this relationship work? Or is that knowledge actually something that's going to create a problem? Right. And the
Hey.
other thing, yeah, well, hang
Hey.
on. The other thing that's important to think about, though, right, with that is like you set your partner up too, right? When you say, like, I just want you to be honest with me, and then they are, and then you're mad at them, right? That's basically punishing them for being honest,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And when you punish someone for being honest with you, this is the same with parenting, right? So if you and your listeners kind of think about it like when your parents are like, I just want you can come to me with anything. And then you're like, this is what happened. And they're like, uh-huh. And you grounded for the rest of your life, right?
Exactly.
Like you probably didn't rush to tell them the next thing,
Yeah.
right? You punish someone for being honest with you, it teaches them to stop being honest with
Okay, so staying there because I
you.
learned a lot about attachment theory, right, and attachment
Yeah,
styles.
yeah, yeah,
So a lot of that is about basically um, how you like grew up, like how the relationship that you had to your primary caregiver, right?
yeah,
Um, that can create a secure attachment or insecure attachment, right? Depending on what that was
yeah,
like for you. Um, and then I also learned more about it, and it was basically saying that like that relationship that you have with your parent, like that tends to affect the relationships that you form later on in life, whether it be romantically, whether strictly platonic or
yeah,
business partners, whatever.
yeah.
Um, so can you talk a little bit about that and what you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, attachment theory is, I think, really useful in thinking about like how our relationships function. You know, and so as you kind of said, right? So there are basically two types of attachment, right? At the highest level,
Yeah.
there's secure and there's insecure,
Right.
right? And then on the insecure side, there are, if memory is serving correctly, right? There are three.
Yes.
You know,
There are three.
like avoidant, anxious avoidant, disorganized, and then
Disorganized.
there are a couple of types of disorganized. And so, yeah, basically, what that just means is that the way that we were able to connect or not with our primary attachment figures. So, for many of us, our primary attachment figures are our parents,
Hmm.
right? And usually it's one parent over the other parent. And
Right.
that doesn't necessarily mean that if you grew up in a family with both parents, that like your mom was doing something wrong and your dad was doing all the great stuff, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that. It
Right.
usually just means that like we just focus on one person, right? And that's our primary attachment figure,
Yeah.
right? And so the quality of the dynamics, right, of that relationship sort of govern how we wind up attached, is how the theory works, right? And so, yes, what that does, I think, is it carries us, right? If you think about it, everybody kind of runs on a series of scripts, right? We have these ideas in our head, right, about ourselves, about the world and about the people in the world, right? How we're supposed to interact with each other,
Right.
right? Whether people are trustworthy or not trustworthy,
Hmm.
right? Whether people are safe or unsafe,
Right.
right? That's all really defined by our early experiences, broadly
The
defined, right?
simulation.
Often
Yeah.
in childhood. Yeah, right. And so we carry those scripts, if you will, right, into all of our relationships, right? And then they get activated in various ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it can make it in some ways easier, in some ways harder, right? So there are more people with insecure attachment styles than you might think. You know, the majority of people are securely attached individuals, right? Securely attached individuals can also be bad at relationships. They're just bad at relationships in different ways, right? Insecurely attached folks can struggle sometimes in relationships. That doesn't mean they don't have relationships.
That's what I was gonna ask you. Like for someone
Mhm.
who has an insecure attachment style, whether they know it or not, but if that's healthy for them to be in a relationship versus someone who's securely attached, like what is that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think the way of thinking about it is like only, and again, I'm not an attachment expert, but if graduate school is serving me well in this moment, it's been a while, right, since I was in graduate school. But if I'm remembering correctly, really only one of the attachment styles kind of avoids close relationships, right? So most people, whether you are securely attached or insecurely attached, don't avoid being in close and meaningful relationships,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes I think folks who can be a little bit more avoidant in their attachment style um, want to be in a relationship, but they are sort of keep people at arm's length, right? And so that can feel kind of challenging, right? Whereas other people who are more anxiously attached, right, want to be in a relationship so bad that they can come across as like kind of like clingy, overbearing,
Yeah.
right? And again, this isn't a gender thing, right? So men can be anxiously attached, women can be anxiously attached, and
Right.
anybody else on the gender binary can be
Right.
anxiously attached, right? And so now how that shows up in relationships might vary, right?
Yeah. It
Around
may
like
look
social
different.
inclusion
Yeah.
and that kind of thing, right? So like anxiously attached men stereotypically, right, might be more like controlling, right? Particularly if they date women, right? Who are you with? Where are you going? Let me see your phone, all that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's all about anxiety, right? And I'm scared that I'm going to lose you. And if I don't keep you as absolutely close as I possibly can, then I might lose you,
Do
right?
you
And
think
so,
that's healthy?
no, of course it's not. No, it's absolutely not healthy, right? And people should work really hard not to do that. And if
Yeah.
they struggle to stop themselves from doing that, then that's probably a good sign that they could use some additional support, right? Like from a therapist or that kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? Because I think at the end of the day, most people don't enjoy being in relationships where they feel overly controlled, right?
Yeah. I would
Because
think so.
adults, yeah, right? Adults generally really enjoy, right? Like what we call autonomy, right? Which is just sort of freedom, right? Of choice, right? I want to go out and hang out with my friends and use my phone and text people and not have you all in my business every day and every night.
Right.
If I'm not doing anything to like give you a reason not to trust me,
Right.
right? And so then we have people who, keep each other at a distance, right? Or keep other people at a distance, right? And that creates its own series of problems, right? Which is that maybe you don't even know that they're feeling you, right? And so you're like, well, I guess she's not into it. So like, I'm gonna go somewhere else. And then they're hurt, right? And sad and frustrated. But it's like, how would I have known?
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah. That's. I feel like that's something that I struggle with.
Mm.
And I've made significant improvement. Like I've made very very big strides in it. But like that was something that I kind of struggled with. As I started getting to the dating world and high school and early college, and even now, like I was very how do I say that? It's like the fearful avoiding. It's like you crave intimacy, like you fear intimacy just as much as you crave it, right? So it's
Hmm.
like you want it so bad, like you really want it, but then like the moment things start to get a little too serious, so it's like gotta back up. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Hmm.
or even
Yeah.
somebody that you are dealing with, like that may look different in a relationship. It's like you said, like wanting your partner to be honest with you, and then like the moment that they do, you punish them for it. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of different things. It looks different for a lot of different people. Feels
Hmm.
different for a lot of different people, depending on your experiences with it. So, yeah, that's something you just gotta work on. It's tough.
Yeah, it really is, because I think that you can see this often with guys, right? It happens with women too, but you can see it a lot with guys,
Yeah.
right? Where a relationship gets to a certain point and then it feels like the vibe shifts,
Hmm.
right? And I think often what is happening is that if you are avoidant in your attachment style, then what you are most afraid of is losing those relationships, right? And so when you begin to feel like this is an important relationship to me, then you're like, oh no, I could
Yeah.
lose this,
Yeah. Let
and
me
you
spin
pull
the
back,
block. Yeah.
right? You pull back, which is not. It's not even like you asked me earlier if it was healthy, and like no, generally it's not. But it's not even so much about like healthy or unhealthy, right? It's about like, are you reaching your goals or pulling away from your goals, right?
Hmm.
And if your goal is to be in a happy and healthy, meaningful relationship, right? And the closer you get to that relationship, the more likely you are to pull back or to cut people off, right? Because you're afraid. So this is another riff, right, on how this works, is
Yeah.
that at the first sign of trouble, you cut somebody off,
Hmm.
right? Because like, I'm gonna cut you off before you cut me off,
Yeah.
right? And so like it looks like that too. And so it's like, that is not helping you get to where you want to be,
Right.
right? And then it's easy, we probably all have friends who that turns into like every woman I date, every man I date is crazy,
Hmm.
right? Well, what I would encourage you to consider is that the common denominator in that situation is you,
Is you. Is you.
right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're crazy, right? But it might mean that there are things about the way that you are in relationship, right, that contribute, right, to either them ending or sort of being a little bit unhealthy or
Yeah.
like that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. Like you just gotta kind of look yourself in the mirror. That's something I've had to do. Like I've been through different relationships with different people, and it's like you said, like I mean, at the end of the day, the common denominator is you. You know what I mean? Like it may not have always been your fault, or it may not have all been your
Yep.
fault, but there are definitely some things you could have done differently, some things you could have done better, some situations where you contributed to the issue and not the solution. Like those
Yeah.
are things that as you get older, you're supposed to you know reevaluate, and like I said, it's all about just looking yourself in the mirror and taking accountability for it.
That's
That's
right.
hard to do, especially at my age. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong.
Oh
That's
yeah. Yeah.
difficult. That's difficult.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think it is hard to acknowledge that you are making mistakes, right? Or that you are contributing to the ways that your relationships don't work, right?
yeah,
Or are dysfunctional, right? Or whatever. But I think the part about accountability that people forget is that oftentimes you don't have to tell anyone about the accountability that you're taking, especially if you're doing it in between relationships, right? If you're sort of looking back and
yeah,
saying, like, okay, if I'm honest with myself, I did this and that wasn't cool, or I said this and that's not really how I felt. I was just scared, right? Or hurt, right? And so I lashed out or whatever it was. And I just want to, like, I can acknowledge that that's what happened and I want to commit to doing differently. You don't have to blast that to everybody that you know,
facts.
right? Like you can just commit internally into like, listen, I recognize that I am trying to work on doing this differently, right? I need to also then spend some time thinking about like what are the triggers, right? What pushes me into behaving a certain way, right? And then how do I notice what those are on the front end,
Yeah,
right? So that I can behave differently,
right.
right? So it's not that they won't trigger you anymore, especially in the beginning, they probably still will,
Mhm.
right? But then maybe it's like instead of lashing out, I ask for some space.
Yeah, I read this one quote about grief one time, and it was saying, like mental health relapses happen, all the time, but
Oh yeah.
sometimes it's just about going backwards and dealing with it differently, so that it looks and feels different, as you move forward. So,
Hmm.
yes, it's difficult. It's hard.
Oh yeah. Yeah. This is why I have a job. Right? If everybody could do this on their own, right? I would do something. I don't know. I do something else, whatever that is. Right?
Okay, um the last part of relationships that I wanted to get into,
Okay. Better be good if it's last question.
it's 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 controversial, I guess. I don't know how to feel about
Oh, okay.
it. And I want to talk about social media and its presence within
Ah,
relationships, right? Because obviously
sure.
we live in a time now where technology is everything. Social media is everything, right?
Yeah.
Um, and people's relationships have, I won't say suffered from it, but it has some effects.
Yeah. I
um,
think suffered is a good word. Yeah.
okay. I didn't
Yeah.
wanna, but okay,
Yeah.
maybe that was the right term. Um,
Yeah.
so okay, so are you currently on social media?
Yeah. Now we come from different generations,
And
right? So the way
that's
that
why
I
this
am
is
on
perfect. That's why this is perfect.
so the way that I am on social media is probably different than the way that you are on social media.
Okay.
But yes, the easy answer to your question is yes, I have social media. Yeah.
Okay, so do you think that because a lot of people post their personal issues on social media, right? The
Yeah.
issues that they're dealing with their partner or their own personal issues, whatever it may be. Um, how do you view that? Like, what do you think about that?
I think it is more likely to cause you problems,
Okay,
right, than to solve problems,
okay,
right? And I'll tell you why. So it's worth recognizing that Facebook, I'm dating myself here. Facebook came out when I was a sophomore in college,
okay.
right? So it was a, I know, it was a while before we had like, oh, Jason is dating whoever,
Yeah.
right? On your Facebook page or whatever.
Mm,
But I think that there is because that is a way that lots of younger folks, right, actively communicate with each other, right? I think you forget sometimes that social media is functionally a public square,
yeah.
right? And so one of the ways of thinking about it is if you wouldn't stand up in a restaurant and announce the problem that you're having in your relationship to everybody there,
Which some people
it's
would do.
probably, yeah, right. I mean, if you would do that, then we should talk,
Yeah.
right? I have opening right? So, right? If you would not do that,
Mm,
then putting it on Facebook, on Snap, on Twitter, on whatever the kids are using these days, right? Then that's very similar, right? So it's kind of like, how would you feel if your partner put you on blast to your whole friend group,
right.
right? And so in that way, it can be really challenging, I think, for relationships,
Mm,
right? Because then it's not a you and your partner problem, right? It's a you and your friend group problem, or it's a you and your partner and your partner's family
yeah.
problem. You know what I mean? So like it creates things that are larger,
Yeah.
right, than they necessarily need to be. And so I think for that reason it can be tough.
Yeah, because I feel like when you post like you and your partners like y'all's personal issues on social media, you invite everyone else to have an opinion on it, right?
Yeah.
And some opinions might be good for you, maybe.
Hmm.
More often than not, though, not the best advice you should probably be taking. Not the nicest of comments, obviously. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just like it's just more trouble than it's worth. Like this. It's not just me and you. Like it's me, you, her, his problem. Like,
Right.
and it's like it's so overwhelming. I just feel like it makes it worse. And not only that, but it's especially in our culture, our people, the black community. I hate seeing us tear each other down, especially on social media. Like it just does something to me, like mentally, emotionally. I hate it with a passion. Like, and that's why like this is one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because it was all about um, contributing to the solution and not the problem. You know, like we don't all have the
Yeah.
answers, but if we come together and help one another, no matter what we look like, no matter where we come from, um, you would just see so many issues. Like it just really fucking frustrates.
I mean, that's real, right? That's real. I mean, I do think that we don't always, again, right? Like we don't always remember the social aspect of social
Yeah,
media, right? And that there are people who are on the outside looking in, right? You know what? I think that's the other thing that I would say about it is, right? Like it's hard to accurately capture all of the context and nuance of any given situation on social media,
right.
right? And I think the other thing that people often forget, right, is that if you and I are in an argument and I tell a story about that argument, right, like I'm never the a hole in that story, right? It's always Brandon, right? Brandon is the villain, and I'm like the victim.
Yeah,
I was minding my business, and then Brandon was like, you know what I mean?
facts. Yeah,
Right. And so it's like it's
that's
easy then,
me.
right, for me to put this story out into the world and be like, Brandon sucks, right? When the reality is probably more complicated than that, right? Probably more nuanced than that, right? Like we talked about before, right? Like there are ways in which that I am contributing, right, to
Mhm.
how whatever that situation is played itself
Yeah,
out, right? But that often gets left out of the social media post.
yeah, and another thing too, like, and this is probably the main reason I feel so strongly about it is because and whether it's romantic um, situations or whether it's just strictly platonic, I'm just friends, whoever.
I would agree.
Um, when you when you air somebody's business out on social media, for me personally, I can't speak for nobody else, but for me personally, that's something that they're gonna always believe about me because I don't owe it to anybody to clear it up. That's my business. Me and whoever's issue that was between us. That's the only person I need to clear whatever up with whoever.
Yep.
So
Yep.
when you do stuff like that, for me personally, um, you're gonna change my perception, like people's perception of me in their
Hmm.
eyes on social media, right? People around me, my peers. Um, and that's like I said, that's something that they gonna feel about me because I'm not gonna clear it up. That has nothing to do with you. I'm not gonna speak on it with you. That's between me and whoever it was. So that's a really big thing to come back from. You know what I mean?
It
Like,
is.
so social media is difficult. That's
It is. You know, I think the flip side I will say to that too, right, is that I think that this is why in person, in real life friends are important,
yeah,
right? Because I think the way that we fall into this hole on social media is that we're looking for support,
hmm
right? And feedback from our social network, right? And if that social network just happens to be between 1,000 and 1,000,000 people who you don't actually know,
yeah,
right, then things can get complicated, right? So I think it is, in fact, really important to have people that you can actually go to and say, like, listen, this thing happened in one of my relationships, romantic or otherwise. This is how I feel about it. This is how things went down.
yeah,
What do you think? Am I in the wrong? Am I in the right? Like, what's up? You know, what could I do differently? You could be
yeah,
honest with me, tell me, you know, whatever, right? It's important to be able to seek and have that support, right? And so for folks who maybe don't feel like they have that easy access to in-person support, then maybe they're more likely to go to social media with it,
yeah,
right? Maybe you know, maybe they're off at college, right? And their family is not as close to them and they would usually talk to their sister, but she's gone, you know what I mean? So, you know, I think that that's a part of it too, is just sort of recognizing that like we need to have a support system.
yeah,
And to the extent that that is on our social media platform, that's okay. But
yeah,
we also just need to be really thoughtful, right, about the kind of information that we share, right, and how that impacts our relationship,
yeah.
right? I would say that more than one relationship like got bad and ended on the heels of social media posts.
That's whew. Okay. So do you feel like okay? So obviously you were once my age, right? So you're a little
Once upon a time,
once
that's
upon a
right.
time.
Yeah,
Once upon
once.
a time. You're a little bit older now, you know.
Okay, I feel like you're making it sound like I'm like super duper
You're a
old, but like
little bit
okay,
older
yeah,
now, you
you
know.
know, it's fine. We go with it. Yeah.
Um, so as someone who's been in my shoes, right, at this age, like dealing with these issues generally.
Yeah.
Um, like I said, when you know better, you do better. At least you're supposed to.
Right.
So assuming that you have done that over the course of your life, what
Fingers
is
crossed.
something like any advice that you would give to 22-year-old you or 23-year-old you at like about
Oh,
these specific issues?
yeah, that's a really great question. That's a really great question. I think what the first thing I would say is that your feelings are just your feelings,
Mm,
right? And there is a real difference between feeling hurt and somebody else hurting you,
okay.
right? I think the other thing I would tell my 22-year-old self is that you got to start communicating more effectively than you do now, right? Just like say how you're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
right? Particularly when those feelings are scared, right? Or you feel like threatened, right? Particularly in like your romantic relationships, because I was also guilty of like what this relationship could turn into feels like a lot, and that feels very scary, right? And so
Why is that so much harder for males to communicate that than females?
I think you sort of hit on it much earlier, right, in our conversation around like it's the same reason that we don't go to therapy usually, right? Is that there's a sense of weakness, right? Like a man admitting that he's afraid, right? What? Never that.
Yeah,
So yeah, right. And so I think that that's a part of it, but I think it's also again, right? Like it's recognizing the difference between you don't have to put "I'm scared of this, that, and the third" on social media if you don't want to. You
right.
can. That would
Yeah,
be fine. Right? Fear is a normal emotion.
yeah.
Anxiety is a normal emotion that we all experience.
Mm,
Right? But in the context of your relationship, right, you should be able to communicate how you feel genuinely and honestly and authentically to the person
right.
that you claim to care about. Right? And so I think if I had done that a little more, my relationships probably would have been better for it.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that honestly, because that's man, like because one thing I noticed too, like with the last person that I was dealing with,
Yeah.
I noticed that whenever I actually do communicate the issue with my partner or what, not even just romantic relationships, but just people in general, I
Yeah.
noticed that whenever I actually do communicate whatever the issue is to that person, the issue may not go away immediately, but there is some sort of relief, right? Like it
Hmm.
does kind of make me feel good after, like, okay, I talked to this person about whatever the issue was. She may or may not have reassured me on certain situations or whatever it is. And like just being able to talk it out and not hold that in. Like now after it's like, okay, it may not be gone altogether, but I feel a lot better about it. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it has space, right? Like it has the situation has some space to breathe,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you aren't keeping it entirely hidden in yourself, right? Where it has a chance to grow, right? And fester and cause problems, right? You said what happened, you said how you felt about it, right? And then you can start the process of resolving it, right? And moving on,
Right.
right? In a way that you can't do if you never express it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you covered everything. I'm not gonna
Man,
lie.
this is fun. Yeah, I'm happy you asked me to do this. This was a lot of fun. This is my podcast debut.
Yeah, yeah. You know, we're gonna have to no. Oh, another thing too.
Yeah.
I just talked to one of my friends a couple of days ago, and
Okay.
her mother is a psychologist. And I
Okay.
don't know why she didn't tell me that. I don't know, almost a year ago when I have a whole mental health podcast. And you didn't tell me. Okay, whatever, cool. But her mother is a psychologist. Um, and we were actually talking about because I was telling her about you too. I said, okay, two and two, we can put that together. You know, me and you, them two, they can come on. We could talk about it. You know, they could be able to give us advice on certain things or whatever. We could talk about whatever. And I feel like it would just be a really good thing to put together, especially for people like I said who don't go to therapy. That's the last thing I want you to talk about. What do
Yeah.
you think? Like, what are some of the benefits of going to therapy and seeking help? Because, like I said, you know how it is. Like, there's a lot of stereotypes and stigmas and gender roles. You know,
Yeah.
we could go on and on and on, but you know how it is. Um,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
reason why a lot of people don't seek help and reach out whenever they need to. So, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that what people typically don't understand is that therapy's goals are your goals, right? I don't have goals for my clients that aren't theirs,
Mhm.
right? And so I think in terms of going, you should go,
Yeah.
right? One, because it teaches you about your emotions, it teaches you how you are in relationship with yourself,
Mhm.
right? It teaches you about how your thoughts and your feelings and your behaviors and your relationship styles and your attachment styles are
Yeah.
impacting your life.
Right.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that, like, that isn't always a bad thing,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes it's just helpful to understand how you're put together,
Mhm.
right? And how you're walking through this world, and that doesn't necessarily cause you problems. Now, most people avoid therapy like the plague, right? And they do everything that they can possibly think of other than therapy, and then they come to therapy and they're basically at their emotional rock bottom, right? And that's fine. We're used to that. We can help you with that, no problem, right? But you can also go to therapy like earlier in the process,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like I started therapy 2 days ago. Right now, I've been in therapy on and off for years, right? I started therapy 2 days ago, not because there's anything wrong, right? Just because I'm feeling a little, I've recently made a work transition, right? I have a son who's going to be one,
Right.
right? Like I just have some life transitions happening. And I just want to like have somebody else to talk them through with to make sure that I'm on the right page,
Right.
right? And sort of thinking about it the right way. And so it's not always about going to therapy because something is broken, right? Or something is wrong with you,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes it's just like, yeah, there's just some stuff going on. I just want to have the opportunity to talk it through,
Right.
right? And make sure that I'm tackling it in a way that makes sense, in a way that is consistent with my goals, right? For myself and my family and my life.
Yeah. I feel like therapy is one of by far like one of the best decisions I ever made in my life.
Hard saying. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, it was probably one of the hardest things to initiate, um,
Mm-hmm.
because of like the perception of that and what comes behind it. Um, but that was something I had to fight. And my very first session, I'll never forget it, man. I went in there and I was talking with her, and she asked me, she was like, very first question, she said, like, what brings you to therapy? And in the back of my, like, I knew a question was like that was gonna come. You know, I just didn't
Sure.
know I didn't know how I was gonna feel about it, what I was gonna say, if I was gonna be able to talk to anybody, because like I'm the type of person, well, not now, but I was the type of person like I'm not. I just don't. I have a really hard time like talking with people about my own personal issues. Right now, I've made
Mm-hmm.
strides with that. I've gotten a hell of a lot better now. But that's who I used to be, right? And that's a lot of people going into therapy. So that's who I thought I was gonna be. But
Yeah.
when she asked me that question, once I got to talking, I couldn't stop. I could not
Yeah.
stop. It was like, damn, we should have been here.
It is.
You know what I'm saying? Damn.
It is often like that. It
Right.
is often like that. And it's as a therapist, it's one of my favorite things,
Mhm.
right? It's one of my favorite experiences because I think that we convince ourselves, right, particularly in the Black community, right? We can, particularly men, right? So we convince ourselves that like everything is fine. I don't need to give voice to this. I don't need to say this out loud. I'll
Right.
deal with it, right? Men are strong. Men can handle it. I'm strong. I'm tough. Not a problem. I'll take care of it,
Yeah.
right? And really, it's just like take the opportunity, right? When you have the opportunity, then you say like, "Oh, wait, I've got 20 years,
Yeah.
of stuff to talk about that I just haven't ever talked about before."
Yeah. That is. It was hard. Don't get me wrong, but man, like even like going into the second session, um, it was just like it was something that I looked forward to. You know, like it was
Yeah,
something like okay, like that was one of the highlights of my day. You know, like I wanted to go to therapy. I wanted to be able to talk about certain issues that was really bothering me, and it's one of the best experiences because it gives you the opportunity, the space, for one, to talk to someone who's not going to judge you. Like this person
yeah,
knows nothing about you, so anything that you like feel bad about or guilty about, whatever the case may be, like just talking to a fresh pair of ears who knows nothing about you, like it really really helps, and like it gives you the opportunity to learn so much about you. Like there's so much about me that I never realized. Like And then when she just gave me a different perspective or just a different lens to look out of on certain topics and situations, it was like, well, damn. No, I see how she could have felt this. I see how he might have. I could have handled this better. Maybe I was a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like you start to get that. So like
Yep.
that has been one of the best. Man, it's been one of the best decisions I've ever
It's so important. It's so important. And I wish more people were open to the experience.
made. Mhm.
And at the same time, I think the flip side that we have to point out is that access can be hard,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes it's not about, oh, I don't want to go to therapy. Sometimes it's, nah, I'll go to therapy in a heartbeat if I can find a therapist that I can afford,
Mhm.
right? And so that can be really tough too.
Do you think? Do you think being that friend therapist of the group is like, because I feel like that's what I am. Like
Uh
I'm the
huh.
friend that people call at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Like B, this is what's going on. It's been like that for years, right? Um, and I have friends who are very good listeners.
Hmm.
But as far as the actually giving advice part, they're not the best. They're not the best.
Yeah.
Um, I'm normally the person they go to for that, right? Do you think that's, I wouldn't say healthy or unhealthy, but like, how do you view that?
It's fine. I think it's important to know the difference, right, between friends who are good listeners and who have good ideas and can give you good advice. Everybody should have a friend like that. Everybody
Yeah,
should have two, maybe even three friends like that. That would be great,
yeah, I have
right?
some. Yeah, yeah,
And at the same time, your friends aren't your therapist,
mm,
right? And so if what you need is a therapist, your friend cannot fill that role.
gotcha. Well, go to therapy.
That's right. That's right. That's the best
Go
way to
to
end.
therapy.
Yeah, that's the best way to end. I actually have a shirt coming from a friend of mine in the mail that just says, bruh, go to therapy.
Go to therapy, fam.
Yeah,
Go
that's
to
right.
therapy.
That's right.
Go to
Yeah.
therapy.
Everybody, everybody.
Yeah.
Stop what you're doing right now. Go to therapy. Right.
Yes, everybody go to therapy. Go to therapy.
How's it? We'll be here when you get back. Go to therapy.
Yeah,
That's right.
facts. Yes, go to therapy. You know what? The title of this episode is "Go to Therapy."
There we
Go
go.
to therapy.
There we go. I love that. As it should be.
Go
Yeah.
to therapy. But no, thank you. I really, really appreciate you, and I have
Hey,
so
of
much
course.
gratitude, not just for this, but just everything you've been able to do for me. Whenever I've needed help, you've came through. Especially over the past couple of years. I never want to take that for granted. A lot of people wait until somebody passes or they're behind bars to give them their flowers and really just show their appreciation for them. And I'm not going to be one of those people. So I thank you, man, for everything that you've done for me. And I really, really appreciate it.
Of course. Anytime. You need something, I'm there.
So
Anytime.
yeah, man, it's episode 4. We're going to come out with the
All right.
next one.
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah, we coming out with the next one. I'm going to send you some more because I need your insight. You know how this go. So we're gonna tap
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're
Anytime.
gonna lock in.
All right.
All right,
I'll
man.
talk
Thank
to
you,
you
man. I
later.
appreciate
Of course.
it. All right.